Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold metal window of his ship. He stared out into the empty darkness of space, looking for something that should have been there. According to all the maps and records, a planet called Earth was supposed to be right here, but there was nothing except stars and silence. The ship Stellar Dawn moved slowly through the quiet system. Jake had been traveling through space for 15 years, visiting different worlds and meeting strange alien races. But this place felt different. This place felt forgotten. "Commander, you need to see this," called Dr. Lisa Campbell from across the bridge. She was bent over her scanning equipment, her blonde hair falling into her eyes as she worked. Lisa was the smartest person Jake knew when it came to studying old civilizations. If anyone could figure out what happened here, it was her. Jake walked over to look at her screen. The readings showed something impossible. "What am I looking at, Lisa?" "That's the third planet from the sun," she said, pointing at the green and blue world spinning slowly below them. "The surface scans show massive structures buried everywhere. Cities, Jake. Huge cities that could hold millions of people, but they're all empty and covered with plants and dirt." Captain Roy Henderson joined them at the scanning station. Roy was older than both of them, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes from years of space travel. He had seen many strange things in his career, but even he looked puzzled. "How old are these cities?" Roy asked. Lisa checked her readings again. "Best guess? 20,000 years, maybe more. Whatever built these places has been gone for a very long time." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. 20,000 years was longer than most civilizations lasted. The Galactic Council kept records of every intelligent species they had ever met, but there was barely anything about humans in their files. Just a few notes about a race that had gone quiet thousands of years ago. "Take us down," Jake ordered. "I want to see these ruins for myself." The stellar dawn descended through the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, Jake could see vast oceans and green continents. The world looked healthy and alive, but empty of any intelligent life. As they flew lower, he began to make out the shapes Lisa had found with her scanners. Massive rectangular outlines stretched across the landscape, covered by grass and small trees. Some were so big they disappeared beyond the horizon. These weren't just buildings, they were entire cities buried by time and nature. Elena Rodriguez, their communications expert, looked up from her equipment with a worried expression. Elena was young but very good at her job. She could pick up radio signals from halfway across the galaxy if she tried hard enough. "Commander, I'm getting something weird," she said. "There are patterns in the background radiation, like a heartbeat, coming from deep underground. It's very faint, but it's definitely there." "A heartbeat?" Jake asked. "You mean something is still alive down there?" "I don't know," Elena replied. "But whatever it is, it's been going for a long time. The pattern is too regular to be natural." Jake made his decision. "We're going down. Roy, find us a good landing spot near one of those buried cities. Lisa, I want you to get your excavation equipment ready. Elena, keep monitoring those signals." They landed on what looked like a flat plain covered with tall grass, but Jake could see the straight lines hidden beneath the vegetation. This had once been a landing field for spacecraft, probably bigger than anything the current galaxy used. As the crew set up their base camp, Jake walked to the edge of what his instruments told him was a buried runway. He knelt down and brushed away some of the dirt and grass. Underneath, he found smooth metal that still gleamed despite being buried for 20,000 years. "Commander," called Dr. Campbell from near their landing site. "You need to see this." Jake walked over to where Lisa was standing next to a hole her equipment had dug in the ground. She was holding a piece of metal in her hands, turning it over and examining it carefully. "What is it?" Jake asked. "It's part of a sign," Lisa said. "Look at these markings. They're in a language I don't recognize, but the metal is incredible. After 20,000 years buried in dirt, it should be rusted to pieces. Instead, it looks like it was made yesterday." Jake took the metal piece and examined it. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen in his travels across the galaxy. They were simple but somehow elegant, as if whoever made them had put a lot of thought into how they looked. "Sir?" Elena called from her communication station. I'm picking up something else. There are metal objects in orbit around this planet, thousands of them. They're too small to be ships, but too big to be natural debris. Jake looked up at the sky, wondering what secrets were floating above them. How long have they been up there? Hard to say, Elena replied. But based on their orbital decay, probably about as long as these cities have been buried. As the sun set on their first day, Jake stood at the edge of their camp and looked out over the buried civilization. Somewhere beneath his feet lay the remains of a race that had once traveled among the stars. They had built cities that lasted 20,000 years and created metal that didn't rust or break. But where had they gone, and why had they stayed silent for so long? Jake didn't know it yet, but the answers to those questions would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. Deep beneath his feet, in tunnels and chambers that stretched for miles underground, something was stirring. Something that had been waiting patiently for 20,000 years. The humans were gone, but they were not forgotten. And soon, very soon, they would be coming home. 3 weeks had passed since the team landed on the forgotten world. Dr. Lisa Campbell wiped sweat from her forehead as she stood at the edge of the biggest discovery of her career. Her excavation equipment had finally broken through into something that made her heart race with excitement. Jake, you have to come see this, she called into her radio. We found it. We found the entrance. Commander Jake Morrison ran across the camp to where Lisa stood next to a hole in the ground. But this wasn't just any hole. Metal steps led down into darkness, and the walls were covered with panels that glowed softly in the dim light. The air, coming up from below, felt warm and somehow alive. How deep does it go? Jake asked, peering down into the tunnel. Our scanners can't find the bottom, Lisa replied. This complex stretches for miles underground, maybe hundreds of miles. Jake, this isn't just a building. It's like an entire city built under the surface. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker arrived with his security team, carrying lights and weapons. Steve was a big man with careful eyes who always thought about danger first. He didn't like the idea of going into unknown places, but he understood. They had to explore. I'll go first, Steve said, checking his equipment. If there's anything dangerous down there, I want to find it before anyone else gets hurt. The team descended into the underground complex step by step. The metal steps were solid and strong, showing no signs of age despite being 20,000 years old. The walls were covered with smooth panels that lit up as they walked past, as if the place was welcoming them home. The air is breathable, reported Dr. Amy Foster, their technology expert. Amy was young but very smart with computers and machines. Her scanners beeped constantly as they walked deeper into the complex. Temperature is perfect for humans. It's like this place was designed for us. The tunnel led to a wide corridor that stretched into the distance. The ceiling was high above their heads, and the walls showed pictures that moved and changed as they watched. The images showed stars and planets, but also things that looked like spaceships flying between them. Are those ships? Jake asked, stopping to look at one of the moving pictures. They look like ships, Amy replied, scanning the wall with her equipment. But the design is nothing like what we use now. These are bigger and they're shaped differently, almost like they were built for long journeys. Elena Rodriguez walked behind them, her communications equipment making soft sounds as it picked up signals from the walls around them. Commander, the signals are getting stronger, she reported. Whatever is sending that heartbeat, we're getting closer to it. They walked for almost an hour through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Sometimes they passed rooms filled with equipment they didn't recognize. Other times they found chambers with walls covered in symbols that looked like writing, but in a language none of them could read. Finally, they reached a huge circular room with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. In the center of the room stood a single platform, and on that platform was something that made them all stop and stare. It was a crystal, but not like any crystal they had ever seen. It was as tall as a person, and glowed with soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat, the same heartbeat Elena had been detecting from orbit. That's it, Elena whispered. That's what's been sending the signals. As they approached the crystal, the room suddenly came alive around them. Lights appeared in the air, forming pictures and symbols that floated like ghosts. The images showed the same planet they were standing on, but 20,000 years ago, when it was covered with cities full of people. My God, Lisa breathed, watching the pictures change and move. These are humans, real humans, just like us. The floating images showed humans building great cities and launching ships into space. They showed them traveling to other worlds and meeting alien races that Jake recognized from the current galactic civilizations. But these humans looked different somehow. They seemed more advanced, more confident, like they had seen and done things the current galaxy couldn't imagine. Look at their ships, Amy said, pointing at the images floating above them. They're huge. Some of them look like they could carry entire cities inside them. The pictures kept changing, showing human colonies on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy. Jake saw planets that were now controlled by the Zephyrian Empire and the Vorthan Collective. But in these ancient images, they were human worlds with human cities and human families. They were everywhere, Jake said quietly. The humans weren't just another small race. They were one of the major powers in the galaxy. Then the images changed to show something that made everyone in the room feel cold. All the human ships, thousands and thousands of them, were gathering together in space. Ships came from every corner of the galaxy, forming the largest fleet anyone had ever seen. Where are they going? Steve asked, watching the massive fleet. Prepare to leave. The final image answered his question. The entire human fleet jumped into hyperspace, but not toward any known part of the galaxy. They were heading outward, beyond the edge of known space, into the empty darkness between galaxies. As the last image faded away, Elena's equipment suddenly exploded with activity. Alarms and beeps filled the circular chamber as her scanners detected something impossible. "Commander," Elena said, her voice shaking with excitement and fear, "I'm getting readings from all over the galaxy. Long-range sensors are picking up energy signatures that match the ships we just saw in those images." Jake felt his heart start to beat faster. "What are you saying, Elena?" "I'm saying the ships in those pictures, the ones that left 20,000 years ago, are coming back. They're in hyperspace right now, heading for the core worlds." Amy checked her own equipment and confirmed Elena's readings. "She's right, Commander. Something big is moving through hyperspace. Multiple contacts coming from the direction of the galactic rim." Steve immediately got on his radio to contact their ship in orbit. "Stellar Dawn, this is ground team. We need you to confirm long-range sensor readings. Are you detecting any hyperspace activity?" The reply came back quickly. "Ground team, this is Stellar Dawn, confirmed. We're showing massive hyperspace disturbances throughout the galaxy. Whatever's coming, it's big." Jake looked around at his team, then back at the crystal that continued to pulse with its steady heartbeat. The underground complex had been waiting for them, showing them the truth about what happened 20,000 years ago. The humans hadn't died out or disappeared. They had left, going somewhere beyond the galaxy for reasons no one understood. Now they were coming back. "Pack everything up," Jake ordered. "We need to get this information to the Galactic Council immediately. If those ships are really human vessels returning after 20,000 years, every civilization in the galaxy needs to know about it." As they prepared to leave the circular chamber, Jake took one last look at the crystal. It seemed brighter now, pulsing faster as if it was excited about something. Deep underground on a forgotten world, an ancient machine had done its job. It had waited 20,000 years to tell someone the truth. The humans were coming home, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. Admiral Susan Clark stood on the command deck of Nexus Station, the biggest military base in the galaxy. Through the massive windows, she could see hundreds of ships from different alien races flying in formation. The Galactic Council had called for an emergency meeting, and every major civilization had sent their best warships. For 3 days, the long-range sensors had been going crazy. Something was moving through hyperspace toward the core worlds. Something big enough to make the space around it bend and twist. The energy readings were unlike anything in their databases. "Admiral, we're getting another update from the science team," reported Dr. Nathan Wright, walking quickly across the command deck. Nathan was the smartest scientist the council had, and right now he looked very worried. "These aren't just ships. Whatever's coming is using technology we don't understand. Susan turned to look at the data screens Nathan was carrying. The numbers and charts meant nothing to her, but she could read the fear in Nathan's eyes. "Explain it to me in simple terms, Doctor." "They're bending space around themselves," Nathan said. "Our ships push through hyperspace. These things are making hyperspace move around them instead. The amount of energy that would take is incredible. Whoever built these ships is centuries ahead of us." Captain Alex Thompson's voice crackled over the communication system from his patrol ship far outside the station. "Council Command, this is Captain Thompson on the Vanguard. I have visual contact with the unknown fleet." Everyone on the command deck stopped what they were doing. Alex was the first person to actually see the mysterious ships with his own eyes. Susan activated the main screen to show the view from Alex's ship. What they saw made everyone go quiet. Ships filled the screen, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. But these weren't like any ships in the Galactic fleet. They were huge and dark, with smooth curves that seemed to absorb light. They moved through space without any visible engines, gliding silently like ghosts. "My God," whispered Nathan. "Look at the size of some of those vessels. The biggest one has to be 50 miles long. Are they hostile?" Susan asked Alex over the radio. "Unknown, Admiral," Alex replied. "They're not targeting us, but they're not responding to our communication attempts either. They're just waiting, like they're waiting for something to happen." Meanwhile, back on the buried world, Jake Morrison and his team had made an incredible discovery. The underground complex had become fully active, with lights and computers turning on throughout the vast network of tunnels. Dr. Lisa Campbell was deep in the archives, talking to something that claimed to be an artificial intelligence. "We are the caretaker system," the computer voice said through speakers in the walls. The voice sounded human but also somehow old and tired. "We have waited 20,000 years for someone to find us." "Why did the humans leave?" Lisa asked, recording everything for the historical archives. "We withdrew to allow the younger species to grow," the AI replied. "Your civilizations needed time to develop without our guidance. We did not want to be your rulers. We wanted you to find your own paths among the stars." Jake listened to the conversation from the main chamber, where the crystal was now glowing, so brightly it hurt to look at directly. Elena Rodriguez sat nearby, monitoring communications from across the galaxy. Her equipment was picking up signals from the returning human fleet. "But why come back now?" Jake asked the AI. "Why after 20,000 years?" "Because our sensors have detected a threat to the galaxy itself," the AI answered. "Something that endangers all life, all civilizations. The return protocol was activated when this threat was confirmed." Dr. Amy Foster was studying the data streams flowing through the complex's computers. What she found made her hands shake as she typed. "Commander, you need to see this. The AI is showing me sensor readings from beyond the galactic rim. There's something out there, something big." The main screen in the chamber displayed images that made everyone feel cold inside. The space between galaxies wasn't empty, like they had always believed. There was something moving in that darkness, something that seemed to eat light and matter wherever it touched. "What is it?" Jake asked. "We call it the void corruption," the AI replied. "It exists in the spaces between realities. Every time your civilizations use hyperspace travel, you create small tears in the fabric of space. The corruption uses these tears to enter normal space." Lieutenant Ben Rogers, who had been monitoring galactic communications, suddenly stood up from his station. "Commander, we're getting reports from all over the galaxy. Hyperspace travel is becoming unreliable. Ships are getting lost and some are disappearing completely." The AI continued its explanation. "The corruption feeds on the quantum foundations of reality. In areas where it has taken hold, the laws of physics begin to break down. Matter becomes unstable. Energy behaves in impossible ways. Eventually, entire star systems can be consumed." "How long do we have?" Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The process has already begun," the AI said. "Our deep space sensors show corruption zones spreading through the outer rim. If nothing is done, the contamination will reach the core worlds within 50 years. On Nexus Station, Admiral Susan Clark was receiving similar reports from her intelligence network. Ships were vanishing in the outer territories, and the few that returned told stories of space itself going wrong, stars that flickered like dying candles, planets where gravity flowed upward instead of down. "Admiral," Captain Thompson reported from his position near the human fleet. "One of their ships is moving toward us. It's smaller than the others, but it's definitely coming this way." Susan watched on the main screen as a sleek human vessel approached the vanguard. It was beautiful in a deadly way, all smooth curves and hidden weapons. When it was close enough, a voice came over the communication system. "This is Captain Mike Johnson of the Human Defense Fleet," the voice said. "We request permission to address the Galactic Council. We have information that concerns the survival of all civilizations in this galaxy." Susan made her decision quickly. "Permission granted, Captain Johnson. Welcome to Nexus Station." An hour later, Captain Johnson stood in the council chambers, facing representatives from 7 different alien species. He was tall and confident, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light around him. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of 20,000 years of experience. "The galaxy is in danger," he said simply. "We've been fighting to protect you from a threat you didn't even know existed. But now the enemy has found new ways to enter normal space, and we can't hold them back alone anymore." The Zephyrian delegate, a being made of living crystal, pulsed with angry red light. "Why should we trust a species that abandoned us 20,000 years ago?" Johnson's answer was calm but frightening. "Because we didn't abandon you. We've been standing guard at the edge of everything, fighting battles you can't imagine, keeping horrors away from your worlds. But the enemy has grown stronger, and now they're coming for the core systems." He activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy from the human perspective. Red zones marked areas where reality itself was breaking down, where ships and planets had simply stopped existing. "This is what we've been fighting," Johnson said. "This is what's coming for all of us. And if we don't work together, there won't be a galaxy left to save." The room fell silent as the delegates absorbed the magnitude of what they were being told. The humans hadn't returned as conquerors. They had returned as protectors, bringing news of a threat that made all their political differences seem small and pointless. The Ghost Fleet had come home, but they brought with them the knowledge that home itself was in terrible danger. Professor Helen Davis stood in front of the biggest meeting room in the galaxy. Representatives from every major civilization sat around a huge circular table, their translators working hard to change human words into languages that had no words for the things she was trying to explain. Helen had spent the last month learning everything the returning humans could teach her about the void corruption. What she had learned kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how anything could be so terrible. "The corruption doesn't just destroy things," Helen said, pointing to the holographic images floating above the table. "It makes the rules of reality stop working. In the zones where it has taken hold, up can become down, hot can become cold, living things can become dead, and then become something else entirely." The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Mindari representative, a tall being with large dark eyes, spoke through its translator. "You say this enemy comes from between galaxies. How is such a thing possible?" Captain Mike Johnson stepped forward to answer. He had been patient with the questions, but Helen could see the worry in his eyes. Every day they spent talking was another day the corruption grew stronger. "It doesn't come from normal space," Mike explained. "It exists in the gaps between dimensions, in places where the math that makes the universe work starts to break down. Every time one of your ships jumps through hyperspace, it creates tiny holes in reality. The corruption uses those holes to squeeze into our universe." Dr. Carol Martinez activated another set of displays, showing star maps that made several delegates gasp in fear. Entire star systems were marked in red, indicating places where reality had become so twisted that nothing could survive there. "These are the dead zones," Carol said. "Places where the corruption has fully taken hold. Our deep space probes show that time moves differently there. Some areas are aging thousands of years in minutes. Others are stuck in loops where the same moment repeats forever." The Vorthan Collective representative, a machine intelligence speaking through mechanical vocal cords, asked the question everyone was thinking. How many of these dead zones exist? 17 confirmed in this galaxy, Carol replied. But our sensors show the corruption spreading faster than we can track it. At the current rate, the contamination will reach the core worlds in less than 40 years. Commander Paul Anderson stepped up to the display table and activated a new set of images. These showed something that made even the experienced military delegates look shocked. Massive ships larger than anything in the current galactic fleets, but twisted and wrong somehow. They looked like normal vessels that had been stretched and bent by forces that shouldn't exist. These are corruption vessels, Paul explained. Ships that were caught in dead zones and changed by the enemy. They're not alive and they're not dead. They exist in a state between the two, and they spread the corruption wherever they go. Admiral Susan Clark, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. What exactly are you asking us to do? How do we fight something that can change the laws of physics? Mike Johnson's answer was simple, but terrifying. We evacuate everyone, every civilization, every colony, every space station. We move the entire galactic population beyond the rim, to safe zones we've been preparing for 20,000 years. The room exploded with angry voices as the delegates realized what the humans were suggesting. The Zephyrian representative pulsed, with furious light. You want us to abandon our homeworlds, our entire civilization? Your entire civilization will be dead if you stay, Johnson replied calmly. We've seen what happens to organic life when the corruption takes hold. It doesn't just kill you. It turns you into something that can't die but wishes it could. Helen activated one more display, showing the evacuation plans the humans had developed. Safe routes through hyperspace that avoided the growing dead zones. Temporary colony sites beyond the galactic edge where millions of refugees could be housed while more permanent solutions were found. It's not permanent, Helen explained. Once we've moved everyone to safety, we can work together to seal the pathways the corruption is using. But that will take time, and we need to keep people alive while we do it. Dr. Amy Foster, who had been working with human scientists for weeks, stood up to address the delegates. I've seen their technology, she said. The humans have developed ways to detect corruption zones before they become dangerous. They have ships that can operate in areas where our vessels would be destroyed instantly. They've been preparing for this fight for longer than our civilizations have existed. The ethereal delegate, a being made of organized gas that spoke through vibrations in the air, asked a question that made everyone go quiet. What guarantee do we have that humanity will not simply take control once we are dependent on them for survival? Mike Johnson looked directly at the ethereal as he answered. Because 20,000 years ago, we could have ruled this galaxy easily. Instead, we left so you could grow and develop on your own. We've spent 20 millennia fighting to protect civilizations that forgot we ever existed. We're not here to conquer. We're here to save lives. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Hill stepped forward with evacuation schedules and transport manifests. We can begin moving civilian populations immediately, he said. Our ships are already in position throughout the galaxy. But we need your governments to cooperate. We need your people to trust us. The meeting continued for hours as delegates argued about details and logistics, but Helen could see that the decision had already been made. The evidence was too strong to ignore, and the alternative was too terrible to consider. Finally, the council reached its decision. The evacuation would begin immediately, starting with the outer rim worlds that were closest to the growing dead zones. It would be the largest movement of people in galactic history, requiring cooperation between species that had been enemies just days before. As the delegates filed out to contact their home governments, Helen remained behind with the human representatives. Will it work? She asked Mike Johnson. Can we really save everyone? Mike looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there, in the darkness between galaxies, an enemy older than civilization was slowly eating its way into their reality. We're going to try, he said simply. We've been preparing for this fight for 20,000 years. We've built weapons that exist in 11 dimensions at once. We've learned to fight enemies that don't follow the same rules we do. But this is bigger than anything we've faced before. Helen felt a chill as she realized the full scope of what they were up against. What if the evacuation isn't enough? What if we can't seal the pathways? Mike turned to look at her, and for the first time since the humans had returned, she saw fear in his eyes. Then we keep fighting, he said. We keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for or nothing left to fight with. Because that's what humans do. We don't give up even when everything seems hopeless. Outside the meeting room, the galaxy was already beginning to change. Emergency broadcasts were going out to billions of people, telling them to prepare for the greatest journey in their species' history. The ghost fleet that had returned after 20,000 years was no longer mysterious or frightening. They were lifelines, offering salvation to civilizations that had never known how close they were to extinction. The real war was about to begin, but at least now they weren't fighting alone. Humanity had come home, and they had brought with them the knowledge and tools needed to save everyone. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen, but for the first time in 20,000 years, there was hope that the galaxy might survive what was coming. 6 months after the humans returned, the biggest fleet in galactic history floated at the edge of known space. Ships from 8 different species flew together in formations that would have been impossible just a year ago. Zephyrian crystal ships flew next to Vorthan mechanical vessels, while human ghost ships moved between them like silent guardians. Captain Chris Brown stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the evacuation fleets carry the last civilian transports to safety beyond the galactic rim. Behind them, the corruption was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Entire star systems were going dark, as reality itself broke down under the alien influence. All evacuation fleets report successful transit, announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim from her communications station. 12 billion civilians have been moved to the safe zones. The galaxy is officially empty except for military vessels. Chris nodded, but he felt no relief. The evacuation was just the first step. Now came the hard part. They had to seal the pathways the corruption was using to enter normal space, and they had to do it before the dead zones spread too far to contain. Dr. Grace Wilson worked frantically at her science station, coordinating with teams of alien scientists scattered across the fleet. The dimensional anchor array was humanity's most advanced technology, but it needed the unique abilities of all 8 species to work properly. The Mindari psychic resonance fields are in position, Grace reported. The ethereal phase manipulators are ready. Zephyrian crystal matrices are powered up and waiting for synchronization. The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. They would create barriers in 11 different dimensions simultaneously, sealing off the quantum fissures the corruption used to enter their reality. But to do it, they had to get close to the dead zones where space itself was falling apart. Initiating dimensional lock in 3 minutes, Grace announced over the fleet-wide communication system. All vessels, remember your positions. If we're not perfectly synchronized, the barriers won't hold. Captain Lisa Jackson led the fighter squadrons toward the nearest dead zone, her small ship dancing through space that grew stranger with every mile. Behind her, hundreds of pilots from different species followed orders that went against every instinct they had. "Squadron leaders, this is Jackson," she called over the radio. "Remember your training. In the corruption zones, up might be down and left might be right. Trust your instruments, not your eyes. And whatever you see in there, don't let it distract you from the mission." The dead zone appeared on their screens as a patch of space where the stars looked wrong. Some were too bright, others flickered, like dying candles. As they got closer, the pilots could see things that hurt their minds to look at. Ships that were inside out but still flying. Planets that existed in several places at once. "Beginning dimensional anchor deployment," Grace announced from the command ship. "Array activation in 60 seconds. Dr. Carol Martinez monitored the corruption's response from her position near the center of the fleet. "It knows what we're doing," she reported. "The enemy is responding. Corruption vessels are moving toward our positions. The twisted ships that had once been normal vessels emerged from the dead zones like nightmares made real. They moved in ways that defied physics, appearing in multiple places at once, or stretching across impossible distances. But they were heading directly for the anchor points. "All fighters engage the enemy vessels," Chris ordered. Do not let them reach the anchor points. The battle that followed was unlike anything in military history. Fighter pilots found themselves shooting at enemies that existed in several dimensions at once. Weapons that should have missed their target somehow hit anyway, while shots that should have been direct hits passed harmlessly through empty space. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker led a boarding party onto one of the corruption vessels, trying to plant explosives that would disrupt its ability to interfere with the anchor array. What his team found inside the ship made several of them sick. "It's not a ship anymore," Steve reported over his radio, his voice tight with controlled fear. "It's something else wearing the shape of a ship. The corridors keep changing. The walls are alive. Plant the charges and get out," Chris ordered. "We don't need to understand it, we just need to stop it." Grace Wilson watched her instruments as the dimensional anchors locked into position one by one. 7 anchors active, she reported. 3 more to go. But the corruption is fighting. Back harder now. The space around the fleet began to twist and bend as the enemy realized what the combined species were trying to do. Reality storms erupted throughout the battle zone, creating areas where time moved backward and gravity flowed in impossible directions. Commander Tom Hill guided the evacuation fleets through safe corridors toward the jump points that would carry them beyond the galaxy. "All civilian transports maintain formation," he called over the radio. "Do not deviate from the planned routes. The safe zones are only safe if we stick to the path." In the underground complex back on the buried world, Jake Morrison and Elena Rodriguez monitored the battle from the ancient human archive. The AI that had waited 20,000 years to tell its story was now helping coordinate the defense of reality itself. "The final anchor is in position," the AI announced, initiating full barrier activation. Across 1,000 light-years of space, the dimensional barriers activated simultaneously. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Space itself seemed to ring like a bell as 11-dimensional walls slammed shut, cutting off the pathways the corruption had been using to spread into normal space. The twisted ships caught in normal space when the barriers activated simply stopped existing. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, leaving only empty space where nightmares had been. "Barrier activation successful," Grace reported, her voice shaking with exhaustion and relief. "All anchor points are holding stable. The pathways are sealed." But even as the immediate threat was contained, everyone knew this was not an ending. The corruption still existed beyond the barriers, waiting for new opportunities to break through. And the cost of victory had been enormous. Entire civilizations had been forced to abandon their home worlds, leaving behind thousands of years of history and culture. Captain Mike Johnson's voice came over the fleet-wide communication system, speaking to representatives from all 8 species. "The immediate danger has passed. The corruption has been contained beyond the galactic rim. But this is not a victory. This is survival." Chris Brown looked out at the stars, knowing that beyond what he could see, billions of refugees were starting new lives in temporary colonies. They had saved the galaxy, but at the cost of everything that had made it home. "All species, all fleets," Mike continued. "We have work to do. We need to build new homes for our people. We need to strengthen the barriers, and we need to prepare for the possibility that this enemy might find other ways to threaten us." The ghost fleet that had returned after 20,000 years of silence now dispersed throughout the galaxy. No longer mysterious strangers, but partners in a future that would require constant vigilance. Human ships took up positions alongside alien vessels, watching the barriers that held back the darkness. Jake Morrison emerged from the underground complex for the last time, looking up at stars that were safe but forever changed. "The humans didn't come back to rule," he said to Lisa Campbell as they prepared to return to space. "They came back to serve, to guard, to make sure that what happened to them 20,000 years ago doesn't happen to anyone else." Lisa nodded, understanding finally why the ancient archive had waited so long to tell its story. They're not conquerors, they're guardians. Above them, the combined fleets began the long work of rebuilding civilization in a galaxy that was safe, but scarred. The corruption had been stopped, but the galaxy would never be the same. 8 species had learned to work together not as separate civilizations, but as parts of a larger whole, united by the knowledge that some threats were too big for anyone, people to face alone. The Ghost Fleet had come home, but home itself had become something larger and stronger than any of them had imagined possible. In the end, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not their technology or their weapons, but their willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others, even strangers, who had forgotten they ever existed. The stars were safe, and they would remain safe as long as someone was willing to stand guard in the darkness between them.